Itai, you're director at Hume, a company that develops science-based solutions for architecture and urban design, much needed. We're discussing how providing equal access to social services and creating comfortable urban environments can help make megacities healthier. However, do these solutions really form healthy habits for city dwellers, especially if we're talking about residents with more sedentary lifestyles? What role does public transport and digital technology play in this? Over to you, Itai.
Thank you very much, Marcus, and thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm going to keep my comments pretty short. If you're interested more in my work and our work in merging science and design, you can take a look at my keynote, which I did yesterday. For this session, because we have varied ideas coming out, I'm going to keep mine very specific. And let me just share my screen. Okay. You can see that? Okay. So this is an idea that, as I said, is specific, and it was part of a paper that was published actually in Cities and Health, which Marcus is the editor of, and it's about questioning whether our celebration of mass transit is something we should keep on doing, or should we be questioning whether the structure in which we create our cities is inadvertently creating a culture of transit and moving us away from health. And so, as I said, I think there's a lot of good points that have already been said. And this point is a little bit unorthodox, so questioning whether we should be celebrating mass transit as much as we do. And for many cities, it's become the pride of the city. In where I am, for example, in Tel Aviv, we're just starting to build a mass transit system. And I know it's something that is people are very much looking forward to, but I'm hesitant to say whether we're conscious of the change it will create in our lifestyles over time. And so I want to offer a lens which is called the radius of life, and this is something that Ivan Illich wrote in his book, Energy and Equity, and simply to talk about this radius of life. Why is it important? Because as our lives get dispersed over a greater area, we see all sorts of detrimental effects brought about by what could be called a culture of transit. And I'll bring attention to some of these symptoms in the hope that we can seriously question whether this norm of modern life is something we should perpetuate by investing further in more transit and working towards higher ridership, or whether there might be alternative routes to reduce our radius of life. And here are some of the effects that we see as people spend more time traversing the city throughout the day. And this is something that is brought about by the structure of the city, by the way we build the infrastructure. The more opportunities we create for us to go from one side of the city to the other, supposedly in quick time, the more that opportunity will be used and cemented into the city, meaning, for example, large companies will centralize their headquarters in a specific place because it's known that it's possible to reach them from all parts of the city. Now, I want to question whether this part of it's possible is the right approach or not, because of course it's possible, but what is the cost? We had some comments about people having not enough time to exercise. Most of the work that I do talks about mental health, but obviously this is something related to physical health as well. Time scarcity, one of the biggest causes of stress, and as said by the last speaker, one of the causes why people don't exercise too. People with long commutes are 33% more likely to suffer depression, meaning less active as well. 40% to get inefficient amount of sleep, and we know that what inefficient amount of sleep does to our health. And also the effect that it has on our relationships, on our personal relationships. Couples who commute more than 40 minutes a day are 45% more likely to get divorced. And, you know, this is what we do in our work when we're marrying science to design. And science is there to really give us headlights, to try and help us connect the dots where things are a little bit too complicated to see on the surface. And to understand why we've already invested so heavily in public transport, we have to look at the conditions that created the need for it. It's hard for us to envisage a city as anything other than a compact center and then decreasingly dense rings of development throughout it. But this topology is something that was created by the car, and it's something that disperses parts of our lives to very distant parts of the cities. Now, when we along with the car and the zoning policies that created this topology, it also separated the functions of the city and created these compartments for us to get to throughout the day, sometimes many different places around the city, depending on what kind of lifestyle you have. And so the reality created on the ground brought with it huge changes to our way of life. And the commute became a societal norm. Not just that, families and friends become distributed over large parts of the city and communities dispersed, meaning we're much less likely to see people because of the psychological barrier and the psychological stress of going into transport rather than coming out of our homes and being able to walk where we need to. And so we think of public transport as something that is solving the problem that the car created. But I want to suggest that it's not solving, it's actually augmenting and cementing the problem that the car created by telling communities and people that here is public transport, you have the opportunity to go from one place to the other easily. We're just saying that this is the lifestyle that we have decided to stick with, rather than let's try and understand the effects that the automobile had on the city and whether they are actually creating health or not. And so there are ways that we can retract our radius of life and be less reliant on transport, have more time for us to for our free time, walk around more and reach places that we need and services that we need, rather than having to stretch out our lives in this manner. And the crux of this lies between the difference between mobility and accessibility. We can create a lot of mobility through transport, but accessibility means making things easier to access without necessarily relying on public transport. And in order to go back to the scale in which we best thrive as individuals and communities, we must revisit our approach to mobility and accessibility. We need to rid ourselves of this culture of transit and transform once again our relationship with distance. So currently we spend a significant amount of time, a significant amount of money on infrastructure and investing in mobility. But what if we use this investment to decrease this radius of life by creating accessibility rather than mobility? And here are some of the examples that would do that. We need to lower the number of times someone needs to travel long distances. That means distributing services rather than centralizing them in one place, finding ways to distribute them to all the different neighborhoods. It means rethinking working, not to centralize all of the offices so that people need to come into one place. How does this new era post-COVID and with the introduction of remote working, how can we use that to change our habits? We need to create jobs in all localities so that they're not concentrated, and we need to create outdoor spaces that are easily accessible so that members of the communities meet and we create social cohesion in place rather than forcing people to commute for long distances to meet their friends and family. So, and this is really what the 15-minute neighborhood is about. My comments are related to becoming conscious of the fact that increased ridership, which is something that is celebrated in many cities, is not necessarily a sign of progress. It may be a sign that we are getting further away from healthy lifestyles. Can we think of this kind of transportation in the same way that we think about roads? We know that if you build more roads, more cars will come. If you build more infrastructure like public transport, more people will use it, because that is the structure that we will embed into the city. And that's, my comments are very specific on this, but that's the end of what I have to contribute on this.
Thank you. Thank you, Itai. You raised some very critical issues here for us all to think and rethink, often going to the core of what a mayor may feel they've offered to their cities in terms of trams, rapid mass transit, light rail, the sort of legacy of that infrastructure. And also, as you know, echoing the trend to think of slow cities, cities of short distances, and the 15-minute neighbourhood.